hope he made a good argument.
Welcome to the news and why it matters. I am Sarah Gonzalez, joined today by a bunch of nerds talking about Star Trek.
I'm not talking about Star Trek.
So much
Thanks,
so
Jock.
that we were like, I wondered if you guys were going to stop talking when the cameras rolled.
I never stop. I will not end a sentence halfway through about Star Trek. I will not leave scotch unfinished, and I will not finish a sentence involving Star Trek.
Didn't we have a Star Trek question or something the other day? We were saving it for Pat Gray because I thought Pat
a big
was
Star Trek fan?
Oh, you got to have him on.
I'll have him on, absolutely. We have a thing called Alienating the Audience. It's a segment I do regularly where I just invite people on to talk about Star Trek.
Yeah, oh my God.
He's like 100%. Yeah.
He would love that segment.
Your show hijacked, as in
Come on, everybody. We're going to go to my show to talk about Star Trek.
The patriarchy over here hijacking my show. Stu, top story.
Let's talk about the wonderful new thing in New Zealand where they've been able to pass massive gun legislation in only 6 days, which shows how wonderful their country is.
All right, Jason.
we talked about this morning. Extreme injustice going on with our veterans and our military men as far as how the military justice system works versus our own.
Andrew.
And I feel like I should discuss Star Trek, shouldn't I, after that build-up?
But no.
But no, I will. In fact, I'm going to talk about Kristen Gillibrand and pills.
Oh, all right. Lots to get into there, but first we want to thank our sponsor, American Financing. So the top reason that you want to do business with American Financing is because that they refuse to do business with Stu.
I wouldn't say they refused. They just said, hey, idiot, if you're going to take that kind of loan, we're not going to give that to you. They had lots of good deals they wanted to offer.
My credit rating drops.
I prefer to focus on the fact that they didn't want to do business.
Okay, thank
you.
you.
My credit rating drops every time I'm on the show with Stu.
Really?
Yeah, it's this weird thing. I actually have to tell my accountant not to watch the show.
Yeah, they actually, when I was buying my house, I went to them and about, I'm a bit of an obsessive, stat nerd, as you may know. So I went to like 10 different places, and they had that. I was trying to get the best deal for my kind of crazy option that I wanted to do. And I got it down to only one of the 10 would actually do it. And American Financing had a much more responsible mortgage option, which was by far the best deal of all the other ones. And I kind of wanted to do this crazy thing.
Will Guido break your legs?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
I will be. I do have some serious repercussions if I don't make payments, but whatever. But it was interesting because I went to them and I said, look, I kind of thinking I might want to take this one. Can you guys do that? And they're like, well, we can't do that. If you really want that, you should take it from them, because that's the way they deal with you. I honestly found that, because I bothered them with pestering with all sorts of questions. But I mean, what business can you go to and say, hey, I have these other businesses with their options. Which one do you think is best? And they said, yeah, you know what? For what you're looking for, I think that one's best, and it's not them.
Yeah.
Like that's the type of people they are, and of course they know all the details about the business. They can answer your questions, and they can do it responsibly. So I had a great experience with them. So
if you want to do all of that responsibly, unlike Stu here, you can go to AmericanFinancing.net or you can call 800-906-2440.
Or go to Guido. He's under the 17th Street Bridge.
You don't want to do that. don't do that.
Okay. New Zealand is getting lots of praise today because, you know what? They acted. We have shootings here, and what do? Nothing. What do they do there? Immediately they act. They got something done. That's how it's supposed to work, as you know. In fact, look at how much they got done. The New Zealand weapon ban, they got all military semi-automatic weapons banned. Now, I don't know what that is exactly. Jason, as a military person, maybe you can educate us on what a military semi-automatic weapon is?
What they classify as a military semi-automatic weapon, it was actually a civilian weapon. It was designed to be a civilian weapon, and the military was like, hey, that's kind of cool, can we use that? So Armalite Rifle actually said, yeah, here's the schematics if you pay us a ton of money. So it's a civilian weapon. Also, the way they classify that is by certain attachments or characteristics like pistol grips, stuff like that, which could mean anything.
Yeah.
There's literally hunting shotguns that have those characteristics.
And there are technical definitions that are in the middle of all of this. However, for almost every single person who's ever talked about it, is it scary looking or not, is essentially the defining characteristic. Right. Does it look scary? Like, does it look like I could watch Rambo and see it?
Is it painted black?
Yeah, black is, it's the big thing. Again, that's racist. Next is assault rifles. They're gone too. Now, I don't know what the difference between an assault rifle and a military semi-automatic weapon is exactly. I mean, I guess, you've got pistols and all sorts of things, and then you have a high-capacity magazine, which again, I don't know exactly what the high capacity is. I guess high is sort of
over 10
subjective, but usually they go.
Well, I did see something from our good friend Dana Lash, and what she said was that they defined, in this case, they defined assault weapons as anything with a detachable mag and capable of holding more than 5 rounds.
So high capacity is 6?
Yeah. So that's pretty much all semi-automatic weapons.
I mean, look, they basically, went through and banned, most guns that people would actually, use in their own protection. And they're being praised for this. And there's a couple of parts of this that I think are interesting. First of all, making decisions in emotional times is a bad idea. And, we all know you don't go to, looking at me, you might not know that I know, but you shouldn't go to grocery stores when you're hungry, right? Like, that's not a good time to do that. Making decisions we saw with the Patriot Act was probably not a good idea. But if you think about it, take it even more specifically, if one gun is used in a really bad way, you ban all the weapons. I mean, think about that with a Muslim doing a terrorist attack. Should we just round up all the Muslims because one Muslim did something wrong? Well, of course the answer to that is no. That's an insane approach. We'd be getting rid of a lot of Muslims that were doing nothing wrong, people who were legal citizens doing everything right. And that's the same thing that's happening with guns here. They're taking away, thousands and thousands of weapons from people who didn't do anything wrong with them. And that is a really bad precedent. You're never going to make a good decision. Take your time. This is why we have the Second Amendment, and thank God we do. This is why we have a Constitution that slows the process, doesn't speed it up. People get, you're supposed to put the brakes on democracy, essentially. We want to make sure we're making decisions in sober times rather than making them in emotional times. It's the same reason we don't have, 20 minutes after a driver runs over somebody's daughter, we don't have the dad dish out punishment. That's not a sensible way to do it, because that's an emotional time and you don't make good decisions at emotional times. So I think that praise is really disturbing to me, because you're going down a road where that is what our country seems to want: faster, faster, faster. And when you're talking about overturning a major principle, you probably don't want to go down that road. And they're doing it so quickly, really, and with so much praise, it makes me nervous. And
at a time when gun violence really wasn't at any kind of catastrophic rise in New Zealand. The last time they had a mass shooting was, I believe, in 1990. So it's been a long time since they've had anything even comparable to it.
Right.
But it's the same thing that happened in Australia. It's the same thing that happened in the UK. One of these types of scenarios, and then they go full bore grabbing the guns. And actually, in Australia, I think they did both a buyback and confiscation program. They got about 1 million guns. Since that time, well over 1 million guns have re-entered into the stream. So it really did nothing.
And it did not cut murder rates at all in those scenarios, and it won't do anything here. Remember, New Zealand if you live in New Zealand, you have about 4.3 times as likely to be killed in a mass shooting than you are in the United States. That's just a fact, because you know what? Yes, they've only had 2. It's not even true that they've only had 2 mass shootings. They count the one in 1990 as the most recent one, but there's been multiple 5, 6, and 7 type of situations where people have been shot over the years. But I mean, even if you take out, we talked about this the other day, even if you take out the most recent 50 people dying in a mass shooting, you're still over twice as likely to be shot in New Zealand and the United States than in the United States in a mass shooting. And I think maybe the most disturbing part about all of this is you are giving control of your laws to a murderous white supremacist. They had chances to pass these laws in sober times when they were considering it without emotion. And instead, they've basically handed control of their government over to this guy who, because of his actions, they've changed the laws of people, millions of people in New Zealand, and their ability to own something that they were using within legal bounds. So that is a really bad precedent, and not something that no one would design. You don't want to make laws based on these things. You want to make laws in times where you're carefully considering them, because if not, you're likely to go over the line and take rights away from people who don't deserve those rights to be taken away.
It's so dishonest only with when you have a mass killing. The only time they label it anything beyond a mass killing is when guns are involved. Then it's a mass shooting. Mm-hmm. If it's anything else, they just call it a mass killing. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely ridiculous. The worst mass killing in the past 3 or 4 years didn't have guns to do with it at all. It was the Nice Bastille attack in France. I think around 86 people killed, over 400 people wounded. But they didn't call it a mass trucking. They didn't call it that because that is ridiculous.
They also didn't call, as you pointed out on radio, for all of the trucks to be rounded up and confiscated.
I mean, and that's been said before, but it points out how ridiculous this is. We don't blame the truck. We're not going to go, rounding up all the trucks. Even if they did, it's not going to stop people from jumping in other cars and running people over and killing them.
And I find it to be really important to point out that everyone looks at that 1990 shooting and says they made those changes and they didn't have one until 2019. They're a country of less than 5 million people. Of course they're having less frequent mass shootings than we are, of course. But they did have shootings all throughout, mass shootings all throughout that period as well, multiple. And even if you were to take, I think the stat is if you were to take out the 50 that were shot in this most recent shooting and the 14 from 1990, you're still 6% more likely to be killed in a mass shooting in New Zealand than you are here. So did that work? If they got rid of that shooting, all the guns back then, did it work? I mean, I think the answer to that is clearly no. And when you look at other options that are kind of tossed out there, like Australia, you point out, which would be the equivalent of taking like 100 million guns off the street in this country if we did it just at the percentage. New Zealand, before this, had a gun ownership rate to population of about 25%. We're over 100%. So you're talking about totally massive changes, and it's so revealing. You always get to see the real opinion about guns when another country has one of these incidents, because they all say, look what they did, we should do what they did. Well, what they did is something that is so far unconstitutional that we can't even consider it. And beyond that, it would be a cut down of what, 90% of the guns in our society? That's what they really want. They can't say that here, they don't propose that here, but they admire it. They admire it with longing eyes.
Yeah. Libertarian Andrew.
This is where I falter a little bit. Although I agree with you in terms of the procedural take on this. That basically like dead kids make bad laws. That's not the time you want to do things in a methodical way. But I'm just kind of curious because you guys are clearly very pro Second Amendment. Is there an outer bounds to what kind of weapons you would have regulated or prohibited by the government? Like, would you in one of the articles I read, I think this year in Australia, somebody turned in a rocket launcher or a grenade launcher or something like that. Like, would you want those to be legal? I think you have the right to defend yourself, and I think you have the right to own a gun. But where I start to get into the gray zone is I don't really want you having a gun that can kill tons of people. That's kind of the thing for me. Is this like a one-on-one type thing or something where it does have a limited magazine, or is it designed like I could go wipe out 30 people? Like that kind of thing bugs me. So is there a bright line you have for the outer edge of this? I
mean, there's a constitutional line. Scalia outlined, which to boil it down is A, can you carry it? Right, like that's a big part of it. Yeah. B, does the explosion happen in your hands? For a lack of a term, you're firing something that's blowing up across the street. Usually, that's something that is not, as opposed to a gun, a bullet being fired from your actual gun in your hands. Those are the types of lines. But I mean, again, how many people died in the truck Paris incident? I mean, 30 people. I mean, we're going to have to ban a lot of stuff, right? Like I don't know. There's some number, right, where pragmatically, I'm not saying constitutionally, but pragmatically, we all would hope that if you have one psycho, they can't do too much damage, right? But I mean, you're doing a lot here. Like for example, one of the mass deaths, there was a bunch of mass killings in New Zealand in this period. But most of them were mass shootings. There are a few, like one was a fire. Someone intentionally set a fire and killed a bunch of people in a fire. Well, that's a really good way to kill a bunch of people if you can pull that off, right? You can't ban fire; it's going to be very difficult. You're never going to be able to get to that line. I think I happen to be, I would say, largely an extremist in this society when it comes to this, and that I think the automatic weapons ban is completely unconstitutional, and the reasoning behind it is awful. Breyer's dissent on the Heller case outlines this pretty well in that. He says, because it comes down to common use is the way that they did it. Okay, if any gun that's in common use is something that people should be able to use. Well, what does common use mean? If every new weapon came out, could they ban it immediately because it hasn't been in common use yet? Breyer goes through that, and it's a very circuitous reasoning. As much as I appreciated the Heller case, I don't think it went far enough. And frankly, I think the reasoning behind it is a little bit of it was the Supreme Court's way of saying, like, look, we don't really want to do the automatic weapons thing, but we're here. So here's our kind of in-between sort of parsing to make it seem as if we can get the gun rights that we think are constitutional without scaring the hell out of people. Because I do think to get rid of automatic weapons, that they also should have been they should have amended the Constitution to do that, and that may be something that America wants to do. Certainly not popular weapons, but. I do think that there, again, shall not be infringed is pretty darn clear. And so, like, if you're going to break that, you better figure out what you're doing with a real basis. I don't think you can just kind of go around the fringes like we tend to do.
Although, I have to say, this is kind of like I'm very much an originalist when it comes to constitutional interpretation, and DC versus Heller, I think, is kind of one of Scalia's, who I have like a dashboard saying of Scalia. I love him as a jurist, but I think he kind of stumbled there because he, from what I could tell, he went, oh, that isn't very clear, but I like guns, and kind of swung in.
I think that's kind of what I'm saying. Like, I think Breyer's dissent in that, and I'm not a Breyer fan by any means, but that is a really good point. I mean, the idea, like, honestly, like, I'm surprised this doesn't happen more often, that liberal states, every single time a new weapon of any change comes out, they could just ban it. In theory, they would not be in common use, and therefore they could be banned, because they're really the only weapons that are protected under Heller are those weapons of common use for those particular purposes. I don't think that's a good way of doing it. I think you're right. I think they tried to find a line that worked within our sort of new understanding of these things while still protecting the fundamental right that was there. I would have rather seen them go further. If you want to get rid of automatic weapons, you want to do those things, do them. There's a suit in Texas last year that attempted to overturn the automatic weapon thing, and it was not successful. But in my crazy extremist position, I think it should be.
All right, back in a minute. I already saw it as an extremist.
Oh yeah, I know.
Clarify it. Have an
all
national
this
referendum.
talk about guns and banning guns and all of that. Well, let's talk about iTarget Pro, because that is not being banned.
Yes, that's the funny thing.
Not even in New Zealand.
Not even in New Zealand. They're still keeping it on board.
Now, you got to have a gun to operate iTarget Pro.
Yeah, well, this is funny because I keep talking about Scalia and Breyer and the Heller decision, and yet I'm not really a gun guy at all. Like, I mean, it's not like I'm down at the range at all. I mean, I occasionally will do. I do have weapons.
You're more of a switchblade fella.
Yes, I do. I do like throwing switchblades, which is strange. But this is a great thing for people like me who don't necessarily go to the range all the time and don't necessarily love shooting guns. But you need to be good at them if, God forbid, you ever have to use them in a protection situation.
Well, yeah, because especially I think I'm similar to you in that I don't typically go out and just shoot all the time.
Yeah.
But the reason that I have the gun is in case someone enters my home, I can protect myself. You definitely need to get it right that time.
Yeah.
Right? In that moment, you need to make sure you get it right. With iTarget Pro, you can do this. As you can see from this video, those of you who are watching on TV, it's literally a laser bullet.
It is. It says it right in the package.
Yeah,
was there a Blaze office field trip to this place? Is that what that was?
They came here.
Oh,
they
okay.
came here. So yeah, it was on the hallway right there. So look, range fees, ammunition, ammo fees, ammo costs. This is going to pay for itself, and you can train at home in your living room. You download the app, you set it up so it tracks your progress, so you know that you're making progress. Make it like a little fun family game. Bring the kids in, be like, let's all just practice shooting, kids. And then it pays for itself because you're not going to the range. Go to itargetpro.com, get 10% off plus free shipping with promo code NEWS. And I would just like to point out for the record once again, that does say laser bullets.
It does.
Just making it clear, Pat Gray. All right, Jason.
I didn't even hear about this story. It completely took me off guard, and I'm ashamed that I haven't heard this story because it's been out for about a month, I think. Stu, you might have heard about this. Maybe you have, Andrew. But it's the story of Chief Eddie Gallagher. So he's a former SEAL. He's now retired, spent 19 years in the Navy, did 8 tours, combat tours, all over Afghanistan, Iraq, all over. He has the Bronze Star with Combat V ×2, decorated, went to fight for us 8 times, but now he's being charged with war crimes. Now, let me just start off with saying that I don't know if he's guilty of these or not. That's not really why I'm so mad at the moment. But I will say that a lot of times war crimes are overturned, and you find out later that it was just a bunch of hooey. That some like
a technical legal term. Yeah,
yeah, totally.
Go ahead.
It's one of the things now that it's one of the I think this will be a good we'll agree I think in this stance. Or you'll agree with me on this, is that it's one of the reasons why being sent out as a police force is not a good thing, because we tend to expect our warfighters to act as policemen, which they're not. Their job is to seek out and kill the enemy. Yeah. And sometimes accidents happen, and there are people out there that are a little bit too trigger happy, excuse the pun, on are going after our troops to prove to the rest of the world that we're behaving like good gentlemen. and they jump the gun a little bit, and they charge people for war crimes. But anyway, that's a tangent.
Focus, Jason. Focus.
I'm focusing.
We've got a couple minutes.
So Chief Gallagher he's been in a military detention facility. He's been there for over 6 months. He's not been convicted of a crime. There's just been an accusation against him on this crime. This was one of his officers, and I think it was the assistant officer in charge to his commander, who said that he saw him kill an ISIS detainee, murder an ISIS detainee, and also did a few other things like endangering his team and a bunch of other things. But they're just accusations from this one guy. Supposedly there's a whole group of his teammates that are backing Chief Gallagher, saying, look, he didn't do any of those things. This is being taken out of context and misconstrued. But he's been in this prison for over 6 months. Now, they didn't know where to put him in this place. So for 6 months, he's been in the child molestation ward in this place. He's had restricted access to food, restricted access to medical care, restricted access to his legal team. So for 6 months, he hasn't even really been able to strategize the defense of him, which he's saying he's completely innocent of this. He will not actually get his day in court for another few months. I think May 28th is his actual day in court. So it'll be around over 9 months by the time he finally steps foot into a courtroom. Now, if this was a civilian case, the ACLU would be losing their minds. We would all be losing our minds. This is absolutely unconstitutional what's happening to him. But because it's a military guy under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the UCMJ, then we just look the other way and don't even think about it. Now this junk, I wish I could say another word, is happening a lot. But people don't even think about it because apparently it almost acts like another government. Like they can really just do whatever the heck they want with them. But this is absurd. Congressman Crenshaw wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Navy. I think he submitted it today. He had 17 co-signers onto this saying, look, we're not saying that this guy should be absolved of any crimes because he hasn't even been charged, he hasn't had his day in court, so we don't know. But we're just saying that this is wrong, what's being happened to him. We would not stand for this in any other case. And I agree. This is absolutely ridiculous. This case needs to be looked into, and the entire system in general and how they handle these cases needs to be looked into.
It's pretty insane that you can go and serve our country and protect us, and somehow you get less rights when you're accused of something.
Exactly
right. Make any sense.
Is that standard procedure? I mean, like, it's kind of baked into our whole civilizational model that you're innocent till proven guilty. I don't know military law, though. I mean, for some reason, is that reversed when you're in the military, where you're detained until otherwise released? Is that standard?
Well, they can do whatever they want, really. I mean, your life is not yours, really, at that point. They can take anything away from you or give you stuff. But I mean, it's the UCMJ. It's a completely different animal. So it's I don't know. It's absolutely. I mean, I understand how they need to have a few different set of rules to keep like chain of command, and it's different. Sure. Different situations, scenarios. But when you've been charged of an actual crime, like a crime that would stand also, it would put you in prison. If you weren't in the military. I don't know. There's got to be some kind of, I don't know how they would do it. There's got to be equal standards for how they treat their detainees. Right? He shouldn't even be there anymore. I don't know if they.
Well, that's the other thing. Does he waive a right to a speedy trial if he's in the military? Because I don't know what the limit is in civilian courts, but I think it's like 6 months or something. Where if they don't tackle it within that time, you're good to go. Yeah. That doesn't exist in the military context?
I never signed anything that said that, but there could, but who knows? There's a huge pamphlet on Uniform Code of Military Justice that no one reads. Maybe it says something in there. It probably does, but I just don't see how we stand for that. It's just completely unconstitutional.
Always read the terms and conditions.
I'd be scared to see on iTunes every time.
Andrew, tell everyone where they can find your show, Something's Off with Andrew Heaton.
Hello, friends and neighbors. If you go on the internet and look for Something's Off with Andrew Heaton, me, you can get funny, thoughtful podcasts on the regular, in fact, on a daily basis, Monday through Friday. Today, we had a whole hour talking about North Korea. Yesterday, the presidency. It's fun stuff. You should check it out.
Also, really quickly, Jason and I are filling in for Steve Deace tomorrow, once again. What is that, 12 Eastern? So you can tune in on Blaze TV and wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you guys in overtime.
I mean, sure, I'm on multiple podcasts too, but let's not mention any of them.